All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always ready to learn something new. What are we diving into today?
Today, it's PTSD,
Mm-hmm.
post-traumatic stress disorder.
Okay, yeah. Seems like everyone's heard of PTSD, but not sure everyone really understands it.
Exactly. I mean, we're going way beyond just the basics here. Like, what actually is PTSD? What can cause it? How does it affect people in their, daily lives? Big questions. We've got some really solid sources lined up for this one.
Perfect. Love a good deep dive. So where do we even start with something like this?
Well, I was looking through the sources, and it struck me that none of them actually define trauma. Like, we all use that word, but what actually counts as traumatic?
That's a really good point. It's easy to assume we're all on the same page about what trauma is, but it's way more complicated than that.
Yeah, it feels like one of those things where, like, you think you know it when you see it, but
Right, but it's not that simple. And that's
Yeah.
because trauma is totally subjective.
subjective, huh?
Totally. What might be traumatic for one person might not even faze someone else. It all depends on, your past experiences, how you cope with things, even your genes, believe it or not.
So it's not just about the event itself, but about.
Exactly. It's about how your nervous system reacts to that event. That's what really matters.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not about saying this event is traumatic. It's about
It's about understanding the individual's response to the event.
and how that response, might lead to PTSD.
Right. And to diagnose PTSD, mental health professionals don't focus on whether an event was traumatic enough.
Right.
They look for specific symptoms that cluster together in a particular way.
Oh, interesting. So what kind of symptoms are we talking about here?
So they usually fall into four main categories.
4.
Yep. The first is intrusion.
Intrusion, like someone breaking in.
Not quite. In this case, it's the trauma that keeps coming back, even when you don't want it to. Like nightmares, flashbacks, intrusive thoughts. It can feel like you're reliving the experience over and over again.
I can see how that would be really disruptive.
Imagine being jolted awake in a cold sweat, heart pounding, because a memory of the event just washes over you. And it's as vivid as if it were happening again right now.
That sounds terrifying.
Absolutely. And then there's avoidance, the second category.
Avoidance,
Yeah.
like avoiding talking about it.
It can be that, but it's broader. It's about avoiding anything that triggers memories of the trauma. Places, people, activities, conversations, you name it. Some people even try to avoid their own thoughts and feelings about what happened.
So it's like their mind is trying to protect them from more pain.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Avoidance can be really subtle. Think of someone who witnessed a car accident. They might start avoiding driving altogether, even if they loved it before.
Yeah, makes sense.
They might avoid intersections that look like the one where the accident happened. Maybe even avoid watching movies with car chases.
Wow. So it can really affect every part of their life.
It can. And this is why understanding PTSD is so important, because you might not even realize why someone is acting a certain way.
That's true. Listener, think about that for a second. How could understanding this avoidance thing help you better support someone you know who might be dealing with PTSD? It's a good thing to consider.
Now, the third category is all about negative changes in thoughts and mood.
Okay, so this is more internal stuff.
Exactly. This can look like feeling emotionally numb, detached from other people, having trouble remembering the details of the trauma, struggling with guilt or shame, losing interest in things you once enjoyed. It's a whole range of stuff.
So it's not just about reliving the trauma, but it's also about how it changes how you see yourself, how you see the world.
Yeah, you put it perfectly.
Heavy stuff.
And then there's the fourth category, changes in physical and emotional reactions.
Okay, so this is like physical symptoms.
You could say that. Things like being easily startled, having trouble sleeping, difficulty concentrating, being irritable, prone to anger outbursts.
So kind of like always on edge.
Yeah, like you're constantly on high alert, like danger could be lurking around any corner. That's how the hyperarousal symptom can feel.
Wow, I'm starting to get a much clearer picture of what PTSD is really like. It's not just one thing.
Right. It's this whole cluster of symptoms that can impact a person on so many levels.
And it can make just living everyday life.
Incredibly challenging. Imagine trying to focus on work when your mind keeps replaying a traumatic event, or trying to enjoy a social gathering, but any loud noise sends you into a panic.
Man, that's tough.
It's a reality for a lot of people living with PTSD. And it's important to remember it's not a sign of weakness. It's a natural response to overwhelming experiences.
So listener, think about what we've talked about today. Understanding these symptoms is a huge step in recognizing PTSD, whether in ourselves or in others. It's about moving past stereotypes and approaching this topic with empathy.
And remember, trauma is subjective. What might be traumatic for one person might not be for another. There's no one-size-fits-all definition.
Absolutely. What surprised you most about PTSD today? Maybe some assumptions you had that you can now let go of. It's worth thinking about.
You know, one thing that always blows my mind is that trauma can actually change the brain's structure and function.
Really? Like physically change the brain?
Yeah. Recent research has shown this. The amygdala, which processes fear, becomes hyperactive, while the prefrontal cortex, which handles rational thought, can become less active.
So that explains why.
Exactly. It helps explain why people with PTSD may have such intense fear reactions and why it can be so hard for them to control their emotions.
Wow, so it's not all in their head, it's literal.
It's a real physical change in the brain.
Fascinating. So we've learned that trauma is subjective, PTSD is complex, and has real physical effects on the brain. Makes you think, you know? If trauma is so personal, how can we create environments that are truly supportive for people who've experienced it? Especially without, like, imposing our own ideas of what's traumatic.
That's the million-dollar question. It's a real challenge.
It is. It means listening deeply, believing people's experiences, and offering support that's tailored to their individual needs.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, we hope this deep dive has given you a new understanding of PTSD and maybe even inspired you to learn more. It's all about being more understanding and creating a world where mental health is treated with the same compassion as physical health.
Absolutely.
Thanks for diving in with us.
Oh,